2.
On a warm summer morning, I was sitting in my outdoor dog's yard, moving my model horses around in an intricate storyline. As I played with my toys, I had no idea that later that day, I would be taking a leap of faith. It was late July in 2015, and I was 11. I had been happily playing all day with my toys and was brought back quite suddenly to reality by my pet goats yelling about how they were starving to death. Pausing only to pat the outdoor dogs, Sanibel and Oliver, I ran inside to check what the time was. Finding it was nearing 5 o'clock, I ran back outside, pulled on my boots, and jogged down the hill, which led to the bright green little barn. I later figured out that I was the only one outside, as all of the other members of my family were all busy in either very noisy or soundproof places. When I reached the barn, I left the door to the outside open to let in the light and headed into the feed room. The feed room is a small space where we keep the food for our livestock and typically a bag of pine chips, which we use as bedding for our goats and chickens. After I had gone in, I walked over to the goats' buckets and scooped out their dinner. Then I walked in to the stall, which housed our 2 strong-headed Nigerian dwarf goats. Their names are Sammy and River. Sammy is a sweet goat whose face and shoulders are black, but he also has white spots on his ears, nose, and the tip of his head. He has brown spots around his eyes, which draw down in lines down the sides of his nose. His eyes are blue, and the rest of his body is a light brown with large white and black spots. River, on the other hand, is extremely intelligent, sometimes too much so for his own good, and his fur has a background of black, a white spot on the tip of his head, brown lines down each side of his nose, and brown dusting on his ears, rump, thighs, and has a white underside. I grabbed the pitchfork from outside of the stall and after scooping out all of the soiled pine chips, I headed back into the feed room to fetch fresh pine chips for the stall. I looked around. There were no pine chips. There was not one bag in there. And I sighed. Mom must have used the last of them that morning when she was doing the chickens. That meant I would need to throw down a whole new bag from the hayloft. The hayloft is over all of the barn but the feed room, and you reach it by going up a very unsteady, not at all permanent ladder. The loft floor is about as tall as the top of the window area, and so it was pretty scary to be up there with no railings. As I stood staring up at the tall, shaky, foldable ladder, I hoped fervently that my dad would fulfill his promise of a permanent ladder, and soon. As soon as I stepped onto the lowest rung of the ladder, it began to shiver and shake. I climbed until my feet were on the second to last step, my hands resting on the loft floor above me. The way to get to the get to the hayloft is you have to stand on the very top of the ladder and scramble up the last 3-ish feet. Now at that time, I was not as tall as I am now. I was only about this tall, so it was much more daunting to achieve the loft. After I had actually managed to get safely into the loft, I walked carefully, as there were no guardrails, over to a pile of 4 pine chip bags. I grabbed one of the heavy white bags, dragged it over to the edge, and dropped it. Bang! The bag hit the ladder and knocked it into the goat stall door, propping it open. Not only was my way down gone, but the goat's route was clear to the outdoors, as I had left the outside door open to let in the light. It was a clear shot for them to freedom. As I watched in terror, the goats, River in the lead, Sammy a little bit behind, entered the scene. I started screaming at them, trying to scare them away from coming out, and it didn't work. As River stepped in, I frantically grabbed another pine chip bag and hurled it down at him, but that only made him even more interested. The goats calmly entered the feed room, sniffed around, and walked out into the big wide world. I began to scream bloody murder, tears of terror streaming down my face. As I cried, River periodically stuck his head in as if to say, "Yo, human, what are you yelling about?" But I didn't connect the fact that he was still there with the fact that he kept looking in, because I was absolutely terrified. I eventually, after what felt like eternity, but was probably more like 3 minutes, realized no one was coming. I'd have to do it on my own. This thought slightly calmed me down, and I looked around the hayloft for inspiration. There was not a lot up there, just some plywood, a couple hay bales, 2 more bags of pine chips, a box, and some buckets. I had an idea. I ran around the loft, dragging everything I could get my hands on and throwing it down on the floor beneath me to form a pile. As soon as I had thrown everything possible down, there was only one thing left to do: jump. Now as I said earlier, I was a lot shorter than I am now, and the pile was only about this tall and was topped unstably by the plywood. Didn't plan well when I was throwing things down, but I wasn't really at the top of my brain capacity at that point. But I lowered myself down until I was hanging by my fingers and let go. I landed with a crash and felt my legs buckle. I slid off the pile shaking and onto the floor, and then stood up and almost fell out of the open door. As I stepped out, I had my mind filled with images of the goats gone, lost in the woods, and I looked up. There were both River and Sammy, River eating the stray dead leaves on the ground, and Sammy standing up against a young tree trying to reach its foliage, because goats are pigs. And so that was a great surprise to me. So I grabbed their food buckets and lured them back into their enclosure through the gate, because the door was still blocked. And then with a lot of effort, I managed to shift the pile to allow me to shut and latch the door. After that, I ran up to my mom, because it would have been a very terrifying day, and I just needed a hug. However, this adventure taught me many things, such as even if a situation seems hopeless, don't freak out. There's almost always a way to fix it if you work hard enough. 2, to use my brains and do it myself, because there's not always going to be someone there to help you. In Maui's words, muscle up, Buttercup. And 3, to not be afraid to take the leap. Thank you. Woohoo!